Well, I'd like to welcome you here and welcome those of you in TV land to a little talk we're going to have here at the Center for Family Outreach on anger, and more specifically anger management in the family system. And so I'm Tom Kowalski. I'm a therapist in town with a background in school counseling from years and years and years. And so I'll be talking about anger, kind of talking about what it is, why it could be a problem in families, and then sort of like what can you do about it. Very, very brief overview, and what I'd encourage you to do is kind of take stock of like your own style of anger and think about the members of your family. And then I would certainly encourage, if you feel that there's an issue, to get extra help with it, because we're going to just breeze over some topics kind of quickly. But probably nothing is more destructive than unchecked anger in the family. And so I wrote down some of the things that could be that are problematic, and from the very basic things that kids learn from us, from parents, and from each other, but but primarily they pick up their habits and their way of dealing with anger from how you do as parents. And so you're constantly modeling either healthy or unhealthy or maybe neutral skills in how you do things. So you'll be the first experience kids will have with how they do or don't, how humans do or don't manage anger. What starts to happen though, if anger is unchecked and it's intense, it can become damaging to relationships. It leads to trauma in kids, which is an interesting concept. Recently I was talking to a parent who said, well, I don't hit my kids, but yeah, I yell a lot. And the funny thing about, and I'll talk about the brain some, the way the brain processes, or for children's brains, it actually applies to adults as well. I'm going to put a spine on this brain. Okay, it looks like a tasty treat. The way the brain processes verbal trauma is not much different than it would physical trauma. So there's very little difference. If a kid sees a parent lose it and kick things and throw things and threaten people, there's not much difference in the quality and texture of that trauma as it gets locked in the brain, even though it wasn't physical, and it might not even be directed to the child or at the child, but it's still traumatic in that way. So anger has that potential to do that kind of damage to kids, especially really young kids. Stress and anxiety become standard features in a family when anger is unchecked and unmanaged. Fear, that can become also a feature of families when anger is unchecked. Children, how you see it come out in children a lot of times, it's their performance in school is poor, depression, low self-esteem. They might even shut down. They'll also exhibit their own anger and frustration. It just becomes a family tradition almost, and oftentimes it's multi-generational, that if you look at a family that has issues with anger, you can usually find or often find that anger in the grandparents' family and then going back. So it's really a thing that's a skill-driven thing, and we'll talk a little bit about that, like where's it from and what is it. Domestic violence, of course, is one of the more tangible and unfortunate results of anger that's unchecked in families. So we're going to talk today about, when I was preparing, I thought about how there are what we might call normal anger. I don't know if that makes much sense really in the field, but anger that's not necessarily connected to a disability, because there are lots of conditions that oftentimes have as part of their defining qualities an element of anger, some of which are ADD or ADHD, the frustration and impulsivity that goes with that oftentimes brings about anger and frustration for kids or adults. It works for both. Bipolar, people who are bipolar, oftentimes there's that cycling, and anger is a feature of that. Depression, the interesting thing about depression in kids, adolescent kids, is that oftentimes it doesn't look like sadness. You know, we typically think of depression as sadness. It's heavy, it's low, but oftentimes in kids it looks like agitation, it looks like anger, and it looks like defiance. But it's actually biochemically and in the bioneurology, it's depression. So that's one thing to just keep in mind. Also, anxiety disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, which is one of the personality disorders, and others here would be like borderline personality disorder. There could be features of anger there. Antisocial personality disorder, features of anger there. PTSD oftentimes has the rider of anger. It's really common there. reactive attachment disorder. My point with pointing those out is that there are some legitimate mental health issues that bring about anger, as well as just life things, life issues. These are often and probably best treated with a multimodal kind of thing. There's therapy, and also there's a medical and a medication kind of therapies that work. And that's really important. And I bring it up just because if you're assessing in your family, like, what is it that's going on with, my husband, my wife, our kids, it might be worth just considering that there might be something else happening, and that could be something assessed by a psychiatrist or psychologist as well. So it's not always easy to do the diagnostics on this, but what we do know is that these things can happen in a family, and these are things that we are committed to helping not happen with our families here at the center. And so our message is to parents is, the more you know, the better off you'll be. But these things are hard on kids, and they're hard on everyone. So the less of this, the better. Excuse me. So what is it? It seems sometimes that people almost consider anger to be some kind of an alien emotion that takes over their lives, and where did it come from? And my God, all of a sudden I was angry, and I don't know what happened. The clue to that is going to be what happens in our brains. And it's actually, if you look at this brain, this would be what makes us uniquely human. Or mammals have this. This one is a model of a human brain. This would be the brain stem here, and then this would be the spinal cord. Anger has its roots in the brain stem, in the reptilian brain. In other words, when we feel threatened, so anger is defined in this way, that we have a reaction to that perceived threat. And it's sometimes is just a perceived threat and not real, because most days we're not threatened, our lives aren't threatened on a regular basis. But it could be we feel threatened ourselves, or we feel that a loved one is threatened. And what happens is, this is where the fight or flight comes in, and anger would be that fight response. It would be that thing that says, like, I've got to step up and do something because I'm in danger, or I'm being threatened, or someone I am in charge of protecting is threatened. As parents, that happens. And so it brings about this, it's an automatic response. It has physical, mental, and behavioral components. I mean, obviously physical components, and we're going to get into a little model in a minute. People, your fingers tingle. These are cues that people have. Fingers tingle. You get flushed in the face. You can feel it in your belly. You feel heat rising. Fists clench. Okay? You get kind of butterflies in the stomach. You just get tight. Those are the kinds of physical reactions that happen. Behavioral components, that's what do you do? And we'll look at a model, and we'll kind of dissect that a little bit, at least in a real rudimentary way, to see how that works and how it plays out from the initial trigger all the way through a behavior. And then it dissipates. So it's almost like a wave where it escalates, it reaches a peak, and then it starts to calm down. So we'll look at that in a few minutes. In general, anger is considered to be sort of a warning bell that something is wrong, and possibly one model talks about needs not being met, that something isn't happening that needs to happen. A classic example might be that people don't feel respected, and so they have a need to be respected and valued, and that's squished by some situation or some person, and so then they trigger into a reaction of anger. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too, about how that works. Generally speaking also, and most of you will probably relate to this, that anger feels like energy moving around in the body. And the nice thing about that is that then you can work with that energy. You can do things with it. What we're trying to do in anger management is we're trying to move the energy from this fight or flight, which can be sort of mindless, because that's kind of, you're like a snail or maybe like a lizard or a crocodile, and we want to pull that into the cerebral cortex so then we can make some choices. Then you can actually say, wait a minute, I need to walk out for a while. We'll deal with this in a little while. I'm just too angry right now. Or I need to go walk around the block, or I'm going to go listen to music, and we'll talk about some techniques. But this is what, having this, as we approach Thanksgiving, I think that people should say at the Thanksgiving table, I'm very thankful I have a cerebral cortex, because it allows us to do some things that other animals just can't do, because they don't have it. But we store tremendous skills in there. It's a learned behavior in some ways, so kids learn it from parents, parents learn it from their parents, etc. We learn it from each other. Kids learn it in school by watching and observing and learning it. There's also most likely a genetic component. And so just know that that's a possibility. But it can be addressed really well. It can be addressed really well with techniques and with learning that seem to be able to override the genetic component. So nobody is stuck like, oh, my dad's a rageaholic and so I am. Oh, well, it's not that way. We can really unlearn and relearn, which is a beautiful thing because it can be very damaging. There's my brain. It does look like a tasty treat. And so let's talk about what healthy management would look like in a family before we go on to sort of a model and talk about what people can do individually and in a family. So let's assume that we are a family and that we handle anger really well as a family. And it's not destructive. People feel valued. There's no domestic violence. There's no trauma because having anger isn't an issue. Everybody has it. That's expected and normal. It's about how do we handle it. So let's just say we're a healthy family. The kinds of things we would do would be, if I were the dad in the family, I would have good skills in managing my own anger. That would be one thing. And so would mom, and so would the siblings. So people would model for each other. It's okay to get angry, and when you do, here's what things you could do, and they would become skilled in that. That communication is free and open, and that feelings are validated. What happens with anger too is that it's like sometimes I'll use a balloon when I work with younger kids, and we'll blow it up, and I'll say, blow it up to how angry you are, and of course, it's like this, and it's ready to break. The idea is that anger, it doesn't go away until you do something with it. So you can't just wish it away and say, okay, wait, I'm not angry anymore. It doesn't work. You have to somehow work it, manipulate it, use your brain, work on it to move that energy around. And so communication is one great way to get it out, like letting the air out of the balloon. It lets the feeling out, and if that's accepted by people because they have good listening skills, then what happens is that the anger starts to dissipate on its own, needs are met, the reason for the anger, which was that feeling of threat, starts to decrease. You've ridden over the wave, and then things calm down. It's good for mental health overall. That families manage stress, and that includes all of the components. They eat well, they have fun together, there's exercise, there's time together, there's a balance of time with people and time alone. That those kinds of things are in place, and so the family feels like it's balanced and it's not overly stressed. When they are stressed, they also have skills to deal with the stress. And those are things that here at the center we'll be talking more and more about in different kinds of classes. There's tremendous amounts of resources on the website. I'd sure encourage you to look at those or seek them in other places. The internet is amazing. You can Google anger and you'll have 80 zillion hits on that, and some of which are really useful. Mental health issues are addressed, and those would be the ones I was talking about early on, that if there are issues like these, like legitimate mental health issues. Another one that's not there would be alcoholism or drug addiction. I didn't put that on there, but that would be a really classic one. There's definitely an anger component, or often an anger component, that goes with that, along with poor communication skills, damaged relationships, etc. But that's one of the things that could also be a factor. So, communication is open, families manage stress, mental health issues are addressed, and that's just a matter of working with a physician generally or a psychiatrist. That if there's conflict, and there will be, because just like anger is normal, conflict is normal. When it happens, and there are disagreements and conflict, they're handled. And one classic way of doing that is a family meeting. We're not going to spend much time with that today, but a family meeting is a great way to have everyone be heard, to work through things, to make decisions about what has to happen so that the family can regain its equilibrium and its balance. There's lots of models for that. I'd encourage you, if you don't do that, but you think that it would be helpful, you can deal with chores, you can deal with like, hey, we had an incident, we got to figure out what to do, kind of in a democratic way, where people sit around and they're all listened to. So kind of a primitive kind of a style too. Most indigenous people had a model of that, and it worked really well. That's how they governed, and it's very effective. In general, just if individual differences are accepted and celebrated, this would be a very healthy family system. It's open, it flows, it's pliable, and people can grow and change, and that's okay, and it's communicated. And so when issues come up, they're dealt with and then they dissipate. So people ride the wave and come down, and then there's people there to greet them. So it's kind of a nice model. Okay, I know I'm moving fast through a lot of information, but I want to talk a little bit about a model, and you have a copy of this that that probably is a standard model in some ways of any therapeutic work. Like when people say, I'm going to anger management, you know, I had anger management. It'll probably look a lot like what we're going to go over. And this is the one that has the volcano. And this is a model I love. I love to use the volcano model because it points out several things. And for therapy, it's very effective. But if you use this with kids, especially younger kids, they'll get this model. And the way I describe it, and I'll just kind of run through it, feel free to use it at home, but the way I describe it is that sometimes when we're angry, we blow up. And when this happens, that's not so good. There's a consequence that we would mostly say, no, I didn't like that, it didn't go well, I got in trouble, the classics. I have to go to the Center for Family Outreach because I got caught doing something, or I hurt somebody, or I hurt myself, or anyway, you get a consequence. You lose friends. They think you're crazy. It's like, God, that guy can't handle his anger. It's unbelievable. He just blew up and started throwing things. Holes in the wall, damaged relationships, all those things that we know. People say things that later they say, oh my gosh, I don't know what I was thinking. We could probably go around the room and most of us would be able to say, yeah, I've done that before. I've had this experience, either myself or by watching it or being a part of it. That's what we're trying to avoid. Part of what that is and where that comes from, and this is the part that I think it can be useful too, is that all of us have some kind of reservoir of experiences from the time we were born through the present moment where we store those kinds of experiences. So that this could be as profound as kids who are abused when they're little, perceived abandonment or real abandonment. Those are the things that are part of our life story that are disturbing and difficult, and they kind of stay there. It's almost as if they're in the belly. Sometimes what happens is those things get triggered, because we're going to talk in a minute about triggers, and when they get triggered, a blow-up happens, but it's not because of what incident just happened. I call it the kick the cat syndrome, where you go to work or to school and you get cut off in traffic, and a friend disses you, and you order something for lunch and you open the box and it's like, this isn't what I ordered, and the boss yells at you or the teacher gives you a whole bunch of homework and you're just like downhearted and you're just angry. You go home and they open the door and the cat is there to greet you and goes meow, and you drop kick the cat across the room, and the cat's looking at you like, well, what happened? What happened was it was all this other stuff. It wasn't the cat there. But that's what happened. So in anger management, what our job is to figure out how do we poke a hole in the volcano to drain off this seething massive of yuck without having to do anything damaging. That will be the goal. And the techniques we use are called reducers. So they're the things that you just say, for me, these things work. And everybody's list will be different. Everybody's list of triggers will be different. So let's just go back to the model. Triggers happen, and what they do is they trigger at this part of the brain. They trigger in the reptilian brain, the brain stem. You have an automatic response, part of which is a cue. And a cue is what your body does. So an example might be that somebody walks up to me, and this happens in schools all the time. I would deal with this a lot, and they flick you on the head, or they do something like they smack you. If that's a trigger of yours, that happens, immediately from this part of your brain, you have a physical reaction. You don't control it, it just happens. That would be, for example, clenched fists, getting ready to fight, right? It could be something else too. It could be this kind of thing, which is getting ready to run. But anyway, you can see it when you start to understand it and you watch it. It's fascinating to watch how people do it. But anyway, there's some kind of reaction. People change colors, they clench their mouths and their jaws. That happens automatically. So that's not something we say, oh, we can control that. We can work with it, though, with relaxation, meditation, and mindfulness. But this happens, and everybody's list is different. This happens, everybody will be a little different. And then if we're not checked, if we do nothing, the risk is The behavior is something that could be hurtful or damaging, and the consequence always follows, always. So this happens in like some fraction of a second, or it happens that there's a trigger, there's a cue, and part of the behavior is we think about it, and we think about it, and we think about it, and we think about it until we make it 10 times bigger than it was, and then another behavior other than thought is, then we decide that I'm going to go and I'm going to punch that guy in the nose because he disrespected me, and then there'll be a consequence. So the behavior, it can be a quick process like boom, boom, or it could be kind of slow where this stalls, and then it becomes an issue. What we want to do instead is triggers will be triggers, cues will happen automatically, but what we want to do is be mindful enough, because we're up here in the cerebral cortex, to say, oh, here I am. The reason you want to be in touch with your cues is this is telling you that something's happening. A lot of times we're not aware that we're mad until we go, something just happened because I feel that in my belly. So it's just part of mindfulness to say, I'm always paying attention to what's going on with me. Uh-oh, something's happening. That's when, if you're using your cerebral cortex, you start saying, what do I need to do about this? And again, by practicing, these happen real fast. It's like you punch a hole so that doesn't happen, that it just kind of dissipates. You pick a different behavior. The consequence, you go, I like this consequence, which might be the consequence is nothing happened at all, and I'm fine. Nobody's mad. Still, I didn't damage anything. Relationships are intact. I feel pretty good about myself. So that this is what we want, is to live life where it's like this is the control. This is out of control, according to the model. So, reducers. Let's talk about what those are, or what they might be. Everybody's are different. And we'll come back, but let's talk about a few. And this is the anger management technique. These are really reducers. Some of them are very interesting. I have one kid who I work with, and what he does, and I don't even know how he came up with this, but he said that one of the only things that calms him down is he'll get a piece of paper and a pencil, and he draws circles. He does this. And somehow that just works for him to take the edge off of that anger so he can be functional, and it helps him get more and more into his thought, and then he's like, okay, all right, I'm all right now. Okay, all right. And then he starts doing something else different, like what I just did with breath. Huge. Breath is huge. But let's just look at these this is one model. There's zillions of different things. You guys are probably experts at it. Every now and then I'll bump into somebody of various ages who say, I have no idea. I don't do anything. I don't know what to do. There are oftentimes people who lose it regularly too, and they're known as being kind of ragers. So we start working with, let's talk about some corny stuff. It seems corny, but it can still work. Count to 10. This is where you just delay the time between the cue and the behavior. So you delay the time right here. And you do that by counting to 10. You might do that by just you let the arousal dissipate. So it's like it's risen, and you just wait, because it will do this. It has to. Nobody goes up and stays there. So it's gonna move, because it's energy. Energy has to move. It's sort of a natural law. So you figure something out. This is where you walk away. This is where you breathe. That comes up again, but you just might say, I'm taking 3 deep breaths. All you're doing is buying time while you pull your consciousness from this dangerous place or ineffective place up into here. And then that's where you say, now I can do something different. Now I'm ready to talk to somebody. Now I'm ready to just, I can function again. I'm not going to do anything crazy. So one part is delay. The other is distraction, and that also would be in the same place where before you do something you regret, you just literally take control of your attention and you do something different. And while you do, you'll ride the wave and you'll come off on the other side, and that's what you want. So for kids, a lot of times, video games, doing crafts, crossword puzzles. That would be another example would be sometimes with kids in the classroom, you could count colors or you could count tiles, and people don't really know you're doing it. You could just start going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So what you're doing is you're taking your mind and you're pulling it, you're starting to engage the other thinking processes other than that. So you now stand a chance if you're here, where you don't if you're here. So all those kinds of things. Look for colors. Somebody yesterday said that a great technique was to look for colors. So you say, look, just if you get mad, look for red stuff. So I'm looking for red stuff. I see tomatoes, you know. So you just start doing that because it shifts your attention away from the situation. It buys you some time, and you can ride the wave. So here's something that's interesting. When you're angry, you purposely do something that's opposite the anger. You pet the dog, which is something you probably wouldn't do if your anger was unchecked. You'd want to smack the dog, right? So you do that. You find a loved one. You kiss or hug a loved one. You watch a comedy, which totally goes against the idea of being mad. So you unravel the anger. Of course, you got to have some time to do this. Like, you don't, by the time you drive to the store, to the video store, pick up the comedy, drive home, then you forgot why you were angry anyway. But then you could still enjoy a comedy. So, or you help somebody. You just sort of move out of yourself and say, I'm just going to help somebody out. And again, if you're really skilled at this, you could be angry by something, been triggered. People might not even know it. Suddenly you're saying, hey, let me help you with this. And you're picking stuff up and you're doing it. You ride the wave, you come out on the other side, all is well. And then you have to make a decision, like, do I need to talk to somebody, that kind of thing, like, or do I have to make amends, or there's all those skills involved too. Relaxation, this one is a good one for prevention and being kind of proactive and preventative is to get good at this. If you're good at this, then this will be available to you when you're angry. Because if you pick up the cue and if you immediately start working with your breath or you start working somewhere to relax, you've got it, because you've then changed the energy, you've shifted the focus. So meditation, music, and deep breathing. Deep breathing is very interesting. Very ancient techniques exist that came from traditions all over the world. Deep breathing it's not only that you breathe deeply and that you breathe, it's how you breathe that might even be more effective. So I'm gonna guide us in just a little experience of a real classic and effective breathing technique. And what it is tell me, how do you breathe when you're angry or you're scared? Because it's real similar. What is your breath doing?
Shallow.
It's shallow? Yeah. It's just little teeny puffs almost. Where is it? Up high, down low? Where do you experience it?
Upper.
Yeah. Does everybody relate to that? It's up in here, and you breathe like this. And it's almost like when you see the TV shows with the person is like being chased, and they come around a corner, and that's how they're breathing, right? They're going. Well, it's the same thing that happens when we get angry. What that does is, in an ancient physiological way, when you breathe that way, you're cueing your brain that there's a reason to be worried, that you are indeed in danger. So what you can do is short circuit that and bring yourself into the realization that you're really not in danger, because we're usually not, by how we breathe. And the way we breathe is the way babies breathe. And that is to breathe into the belly and to breathe deeply. So if you put a hand way up on your chest and one on your belly and you breathe, the bottom hand would move first and then the top. So it'd be something like this. In addition, you want to breathe in a way that instead of being like this, you want to breathe like this. So one doesn't end and another one begin. It's very flowing, kind of like it mimics that whole pattern of energy when you're angry, the arousal. It's like that. I'm okay now. Same thing. So you breathe that way into your belly. And when you do that, you're basically cueing your brain that you can back off. There's no worry. You're not being threatened, or you're not in danger, and that's very helpful. So, practicing those things when you're not angry is a good idea, because it's not a good time to learn something new. When you're really angry, it doesn't work. Talking to someone, like we mentioned in the healthy family, if you can tell your story, you may have noticed the way this works is you find somebody that you trust, and you're on the phone or whatever, and you're like, I can't believe that happened, and this guy cut me off in traffic, and pretty soon you'll if you just listen, you'll hear the change into, oh well, I guess everything's okay. I hate that. That always bums me out. Over the top and down, and sometimes just having a person witness that is a good thing, and it works. But all of these things, you'll notice you're actually doing something with the energy. You're not just saying, I'm not angry anymore. You're actually doing something with the energy of it. And then it truly doesn't build in here. This would be the person, the classic stuffer. Oh no, everything's fine. I'm good. I know that you just stabbed my hand with a pencil. It's okay. Well, eventually that's going to come out because it has to, because it doesn't just disappear. So. Anyway, talk to someone. The other one is to be physical. Jump on the trampoline, go for a walk, go for a run. Again, it's working directly with the energy, and you're using the energy for something other than just anger. It doesn't stay angry because you ride your bike, you run, whatever it is. You do something physical. It makes a huge difference. So these are things that are here. These are the reducers that would be listed here. One thing you might do with your kids is you might actually say to them, hey, let's spend some, with little kids, this is easier. It's kind of tough with adolescents because they might be like, Mom, what are we doing? I'm not going to talk about this. We don't want to talk about that. I'm fine. But if you start working early with little kids, if you have little ones, you can educate them about this. Then you model it. And then you use the language. You say, boy, good thing I used a reducer, huh, Joey? Could have been nasty. But nope, we got it covered. So are we okay? That's great. And so you might even say, what I used the deep breathing, because everybody's list will be different. Deep breathing, and I went for a walk, so I distracted myself, I got physical, and I talked to Dad, or whatever. So and this will be very individual. And then you could say, well, what do you do? And have them say, I play chutes and ladders, and there's different things that people can do. I journal, that's another one, journaling. I get it out. I jump on the trampoline, I do things, and have them say that too. So this is a model that you could definitely feel free to pirate and use and enjoy. But it speaks to several levels and several layers of the anger, the whole anger thing of arousal that goes up. This is when it's dangerous, and you bring it down using these. So, you guys have any questions about that so far? At all? Anything at all? Does this seem like a model that works for you? I mean, does it make sense? Models they're models, so they don't cover everything, but yeah.
I don't know, it just makes me think, for example, could there be some reducers that might really be kind of productive, say for example, if you listen to angry music, or if you visualize, say someone's face as you punch a ball.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's
Thanks, Carlos. That's really great. There's been some research done on the old punch the Bobo doll, punch the pillow thing. And what's been found is that some reducers that used to be reducers don't reduce. So they're no longer reducers. It's dangerous, especially with boys, if you just let them wail away on things. Although with some kids it seems to work. So it's a judgment call, but yeah, what can happen is that can escalate. So in the cycle, you go here and then it goes like this. And then it becomes crazier and crazier and they can't calm down, where it almost becomes a hyper response. That's true. What people do when they're angry too is there's all kinds of negative ones. The question was about, could there be some that are counterproductive? Well, they're not reducers by definition, but yes, what people try to make reducers sometimes, people will do stuff like violent things and say, well, but it worked, like guys will do that, like they wrestle around, but then somebody's really getting hurt. It kind of masks that anger, and the violence is almost like, well, but it worked. And it does, because it reduces the anger eventually. People drink, people do drugs because the pain of the anger is really great. So they medicate that way. That's definitely one thing that happens. All kinds of addictions can be masks for anger, especially this anger that's down deep in the belly. People don't want to deal with that. It's no fun. I mean, in therapy, this is very difficult to work with because it's like you got to recall all the muck and the experiences that made this happen. So addictions will medicate that away. That's why when you work with addiction, you really got to work with the history of the person, like what's going on, what's in there, what happened, as well as any kind of if there's any kind of mental health issue. But yeah, I don't know. Can you think of any others that I'm missing? Violence, alcohol and drugs, punching the pillow thing. It's not found to be helpful necessarily.
What if you listen to overly violent music?
Yeah, That's an interesting one because I ask kids all the time, what do you do? One of them, like 3/4 of kids go, music. And I say, okay, calm music or violent music? And they'll say one or the other. And it's funny, it seems as if it can go either way. Sometimes there's catharsis, like, I get all into it. And then I'm kind of like, oh, yeah, okay. I kind of got it out somehow. Or it can ramp you up. Soft music usually is a pretty safe thing. That's usually pretty safe. But it goes either way, yeah. Video games, violent video games, or kind of calm, benign video games. I hear from kids that either one, there might be a cathartic effect. But you kind of got to know and try it for yourself, and also let your kids try it, and then you'll know, because you can remind them. Like, remember, what is some of them? I can't remember the names of some of them are extremely violent. Remember, that didn't work so good. You stayed mad for 4 years after that one, that kind of thing. But everybody's different. So everybody's list of triggers will be different, cues will be different, what they do will be different, and what works as reducers will all be different too. So,
I have a question.
yes. Because kids believe that they've got this all covered, and that what we see as a huge problem, sometimes they don't see as a problem. Sometimes it helps because we're sort of the deliverer or the structuring entities for this. This could be where it's helpful. Because if a kid says, I don't have, why are you making such a big deal out of that? Well, you hit your little brother and he's got a black eye. You know what? In our home, that's not really acceptable. So, and then you have to be ready to structure the consequence based on the behavior. And so it's almost like saying, the reality is this is what you chose to do. So let's and it doesn't usually help to shame kids, like, you're a lousy little critter. It doesn't work, because then that feeds into the anger, because that becomes this. So what you want to do is kind of gently say, we have a problem. There is a problem. So let's talk about how I can be supportive of you, help you do things that help you not do that, because this is what's going to happen now is, sorry, you don't get to go out this weekend because I don't know if I trust you. You're just, you're starting to be aggressive. I'm not sure I'm trusting you, so. People get ulcers. They have physical ailments. That is in part probably because of stuffed anger. Stuffed emotions, they actually manifest in the body, and that's pretty clearly researched and accepted as the way it works. So yes, I mean, physically sick, neck aches, back aches, lower back problems, all that kind of stuff starts to happen, stomach aches. Right, so a consequence that just kind of goes with the behavior would be stuffing. So it's doing this. There's a consequence there. Outwardly, it'd be like, hey, nice going. You didn't do anything crazy. Something's changing. Or, I appreciate that that you really seem to get your anger under control. So because you know your kids, you want to say, because that's not healthy at all. That's totally not healthy. So you want to say, we got to figure out some way for you to let this happen. Something happen that really, this is what you want here. Is let's let that happen. Let's give you some outlet. And probably the first thing that we as parents can do is say, you know what, it's okay to be angry. Because kids get into this thing like, I won't be loved if I get angry. My parents will reject me, which might be so ridiculous to us. But if the kid believes that, then that's true to them. So, and then that becomes the beliefs that are really difficult to undo yourself from, including trauma. There's a trauma element to that as well, to having that belief that I'm kind of like unlovable unless I do this list of things, which is totally stuffing what's really healthy to let out. So you got to kind of figure out, how can you then let this happen? Because you want them to do something with it. And so with little kids, you can walk them through that, and that's pretty nice to be able to do, because they're much more open. When you hit the adolescent stage, you really have to sit down. And if you have a relationship, though, where you can talk to kids, you can talk to them. They might say about this model, Mom, don't bring out the model. I don't want to see the model. But you can still use it. Like you can say, well, something happened, and then you got mad. What happened? What's going on? Because maybe we can work here. Like if you say, every time you see Uncle Joe, you end up being really mad. What's going on? Well, he always makes fun of my hair. Well, that doesn't happen to me anymore, does it? Well, then you can structure that. You could say, well, let's make sure you're not alone in the room with Uncle Joe. You don't have to be. So those are the kinds of things you can start. When kids see that you're willing to work with them, then that's huge, where you collaborate with them. Because I would say most kids tell me this: if they lose it and this happens, they get the consequence. Sometimes the police come because they got in a fight, or they get in trouble, or they go to detention, or mom or dad say you're grounded, or stuff happens. I broke the door, so now I got to make some money to fix it. Most kids say, along with all this, is just that feeling of like, God, I lost control. I don't like that. That's crummy. People saw that too. That's their reputation. Kids are working on identity. They don't want that as part of their identity usually, unless they're identifying with, some of the, there's a lot of stuff going on in our culture too that sort of pumps that up and says it's cool. But I think in our guts as human beings, we don't like that. We don't like to be known as sort of out of control, crazy. It just seems like, at least in my experience, not many kids go, yeah, I like that. I was really on the edge. Because it gets so uncomfortable that they lose the freedom that they don't want to have. So then it's like, this didn't work. Does that answer that, or does that make sense in that sense? Okay. The last thing I'd like to say is just that it's always good to be aware of human needs, and we talked about this in the last time, but human needs, because our kids, sometimes, all of us too, not just kids, it's when something is not being met that we get angry. So this is kind of as we know our kids, it might be that they need to make some decisions, and if we take the decisions away, and like an example is, you can't wear those purple pants with the yellow shirt. What are you thinking? It might be better to say, you know what? I don't know what'll happen if you do. Why don't you find out? Because it's not worth the battle. But it lets them have this, rather than if you squish this, the kid will get mad because it's a trigger, because this is what they need, is some experiences and some experimentation with this. If those kinds of things happen, let them have it. Let them do some goofy stuff because it's not hurtful. They may find out that other kids think that's silly. Great, then there's a lesson in real life. That's a valid lesson. Some of them are big, safety issues. We get angry if we don't have food. I mean, we just do, because that's a real primitive kind of thing, again, coming from here. But if we don't feel loved, or we conclude that we're not, we'll get angry, because that's a need that we have, and it's important. So you might want to think about in terms of these, as well as other triggers from different places. It's real hard to know where the triggers are from too. I mean, they come from all over the place, but if a kid's always working, if you have a kid who comes home from school, they're in a really intense academic program, they come home from school, they eat half an Oreo cookie, and they're working until midnight on their homework. At some point, they're going to get mad, because this isn't happening, and neither is that. The hope starts to dissipate, because it's like, yeah, I thought this was a good idea, but I'm just wore out. They're tired, which is kind of a safety need, is to be able to rest. So just some information and some ideas of how you could structure your own thinking around how you and your family are. You may find the same thing. You might say, I want to be making some decisions. It's important to me. And it should be, because it's a human need. You might say, I need to restructure and ask the family for some stuff. So I can have these things too, because nobody should lose. There should be no martyrs in the family. That's not helpful, because if you have martyrs, the problem with martyrs is, where do you suppose that ends up? Ta-da! That goes in here, because it's really unhealthy, and it's totally unnecessary. So we're talking about a lot of skills, and if you feel as if you're interested in knowing more about them, stay tuned to the center stuff. We're really, really working hard. This is a new kind of a pilot to offer tons of information to parents, and then to have classes and resources. So feel free to call and ask about what might be available if you say, stress, our family's stressed, what can we do? There'll be resources to help you out. So I thank you for your attention. Thanks for coming. Thanks, TV Land. And yes, it was a privilege to be here. Thank you.